The Herdmans were absolutely the worst kids in the history of the world. They lied and stole and smoked cigars, even the girls, and talked dirty and hit little kids and cussed their teachers and took the name of the Lord in vain and set fire to Fred Shoemaker's old broken down tool house. The tool house burned right down to the ground, and I think that surprised the Herdmans. They set fire to things all the time, but that was the first time they managed to burn down a whole building. I guess it was an accident. I don't suppose they woke up that morning and said to one another, "Let's go burn down Fred Shoemaker's tool house." But maybe they did. After all, it was a Saturday and not much going on. It was a terrific fire. 2 engines and 2 police cars and all the volunteer firemen and 5 dozen donuts sent up from the Tasty Lunch Diner. The donuts were supposed to be for the firemen, but by the time they got the fire out, all the donuts were all gone. The Herdmans got them. What they couldn't eat, they stuffed in their pockets and down the front of their shirts. You could actually see the donuts all around Ollie Herdman's middle. I couldn't understand why the Herdmans were hanging around the scene of their crime. Everybody knew the whole thing was their fault, and you'd think they'd have the brains to get out of sight. One fireman even collared Claude Herdman and said, "Did you kids start this fire smoking cigars in that tool house?" But Claude just said, "We weren't smoking cigars." And they weren't. They were playing with Leroy Herdman's Young Einstein's chemistry set, which he stole from the hardware store, and that was how they started the fire. Leroy said so. "We mixed all the little powders together," he said, "and poured lighter fluid around on them and set fire to the lighter fluid. We wanted to see if the chemistry set was any good." Any other kid, even a mean kid, would have been a little bit worried if he stole $4.95 worth of something and then burned down a building with it. But Leroy was just mad because the chemistry set got burned up along with everything else before he had a chance to make 1 or 2 bombs. The fire chief got us all together. There were 15 or 20 kids standing around watching the fire, and gave us a little talk about playing with matches and gasoline and dangerous things like that. "I don't say that's what happened here," he said. "I don't know what happened here, but that could have been it, and you see the result. So let this be a good lesson to you boys and girls." Of course, it was a great lesson to the Herdmans. They learned that wherever there's a fire, there will be free donuts sooner or later. I guess things would have been different if they'd burned down, say, the Second Presbyterian Church instead of the tool house. But the tool house was about to fall down anyway. All the neighbors had pestered Mr. Shoemaker to do something about it because it looked so awful and was sure to bring rats. So everybody said the fire was a blessing in disguise. And even Mr. Shoemaker said it was a relief. My father said it was the only good thing the Herdmans ever did, and if they'd known it was a good thing, they wouldn't have done it at all. They would have set fire to something else, or somebody. They were just so all-around awful you could hardly believe they were real. Ralph, Imogen, Leroy, Claude, Ollie, and Gladys. 6 skinny, stringy-haired kids, all alike except for being different sizes and having different black and blue places where they had clonked each other. They lived over a garage at the bottom of Sproul Hill. Nobody used the garage anymore, but the Herdmans used to bang the door up and down just as fast as they could and try to squash one another. That was their idea of a game. Where other people had grass in their front yard, the Herdmans had rocks. And where other people had hydrangea bushes, the Herdmans had poison ivy. There was also a sign in the yard that said, "Beware of the cat." New kids always laughed about that till they got a look at that cat. It was the meanest looking animal I ever saw. It had 1 short leg and a broken tail and 1 missing eye, and the mailman wouldn't deliver anything to the Herdmans because of it. I don't think it's a regular cat at all, the mailman told my father. I think those kids went up in the hills and caught themselves a bobcat. Oh, I don't think you can tame a wild bobcat, my father said. I'm sure you can't, said the mailman. They'd never try to tame it. They'd just try to make it wilder than it was to begin with. If that was their plan, it worked. The cat would attack anything it could see out of its one eye. One day, Claude Herdman emptied the whole first grade in 3 minutes flat when he took the cat to show and tell. He didn't feed it for 2 days, so it was already mad. And then he carried it to school in a box. And when he opened the box, the cat shot out, right straight up in the air, people said. It came down on the top blackboard ledge and clawed 4 big long scratches all the way down the blackboard. Then it just tore around all over the place, scratching little kids and shedding fur and scattering books and papers everywhere. The teacher, Miss Brandel, yelled for everybody to run out in the hall, and she pulled a coat over her head and grabbed a broom and tried to corner the cat. But of course she couldn't see with the coat over her head, so she just ran up and down the aisles hollering, "Here, kitty," and smacking the broom down whenever the cat hissed back. She knocked over the Happy Family dollhouse and a globe of the world and broke the aquarium full of 20 gallons of water and about 65 goldfish. All the time she kept yelling for Claude to come and catch his cat, but Claude had gone out in the hall with the rest of the class. Later, when Miss Brandel was slapping Band-Aids on everyone who could show her any blood, she asked Claude why in the world he didn't come and get his cat under control. "You told us to go out in the hall," Claude said, just as if he were the ordinary kind of first grader who did whatever teachers said to do. The cat settled down a little bit once it got something to eat. Most of the goldfish and Ramona Billion's 2 pet mice that she brought to show and tell. Ramona cried and carried on so. "I can't even bury them," she said. The room was a wreck. Broken glass and papers and books and puddles of water and dead goldfish everywhere. Miss Brandel was sort of a wreck too, and most of the first graders were hysterical, so somebody took them outdoors and let them have recess for the rest of the day. Claude took the cat home, and after that there was a rule that you couldn't bring anything alive to show and tell. The Herdmans moved from grade to grade through the Woodrow Wilson School like those South American fish that strip your bones clean in 3 minutes flat, which was just about what they did to one teacher after another. But they never got kept back in a grade. When it came time for Claude Herdman to pass to the 2nd grade, he didn't know his ABCs, or his numbers, or his colors, or his shapes, or his 3 bears, or how to get along with anybody. But Miss Brandel passed him anyway. For one thing, she knew she'd have Ollie Herdman the next year. That was the thing about the Herdmans. There was always another one coming along, and no teacher was crazy enough to let herself in for 2 of them at once. I was always in the same grade with Imogen Herdman, and what I did was stay out of her way. It wasn't easy to stay out of her way. You couldn't do it if you were very pretty, or very ugly, or very smart, or very dumb, or had anything unusual about you, like red hair or double-jointed thumbs. But if you were sort of a medium kid like me, and kept your mouth shut when the teacher said, "Who can name all 50 states?" you had a pretty good chance to stay clear of Imogen. As far as anyone could tell, Imogen was just like the rest of the Herdmans. She never learned anything either except dirty words and secrets about everybody. Twice a year we had to go to the health room to get weighed and measured, and Imogen always managed to find out exactly what everybody weighed. Sometimes she would hang around waiting for the nurse, Miss Hemphill, to give her a Band-Aid. Sometimes she would sneak behind the curtain where they kept a folding cot and just stay there the whole time with one eye on the scales. "Why are you still here, Imogen?" Miss Hemphill asked one day. "You can go back to your room." I think you better look and see if I've got what Ollie has. What does Ollie have? Imogene shrugged. We don't know. Red spots all over. Miss Hemphill looked at her. What did the doctor say? We didn't have a doctor. Imogen began scrunching her back up and down against the medicine cabinet. Well, does Ollie have a fever? Is he in bed? No, he's in the first grade. Right now? Miss Hemphill stared. Why, he shouldn't be in school with red spots. It could be measles or chicken pox. Any number of things. Contagious things. What are you doing? Scratching my back, Imogene said. Boy, do I itch. The rest of you boys and girls go back to your classroom, Miss Hemphill said, and Imogene, you stay right there. So we all went back to our room, and Miss Hemphill went to the first grade to look at Ollie, and Imogene stayed in the health room and copied down everybody's weight from Miss Hemphill's records. Your weight was supposed to be a big secret, like what you got on your report card. It's nobody's business what you get on your report card, all the teachers said. And Miss Hemphill said the same thing. It's nobody's business what you weigh. Not even the fat kids could find out what they weighed, but Imogene always knew. Don't let Albert Pelfrey on the swing, she would yell at recess. He'll bust it. Albert Pelfrey weighs 143 pounds. Last time he weighed 137. So, right away, everybody knew two things about Albert. We knew exactly how fat he was, and we also knew that he was getting fatter all the time. You have to go to fat camp this summer, Imogene hollered at him. Miss Hemphill wrote it down on your paper. Fat camp is a place where they feed you lettuce and grapefruit and cottage cheese and eggs for a month, and you either give up and cheat or give up and get skinny. I am not, Albert said. I'm going to Disneyland with my Uncle Frank. That's what you think, Imogene told him. Albert had to believe her. She was always right about things like that. So all year he had fat camp to look forward to instead of Disneyland. Sometimes Imogene would blackmail the fat kids if they had anything she wanted, like Wanda Pierce's charm bracelet. Wanda Pierce weighed about a ton. She even had fat eyes, and her hobby was this charm bracelet. It had 22 charms, and every single one did something. The little wheels turned, or the little bitty piano keys went plink, or the little tiny drawers opened and closed. Besides being a fat kid, Wanda was also a rich kid, so every time you turned around, she had a new charm. Look at my new charm, she would say. It cost $6.95 without the tax. It's a bird, and when you push this little knob, its wings flutter. It cost $6.95. They were great charms, but everybody got sick of hearing about them, so it was almost a relief when Imogene blackmailed her out of it. I know how much you weigh, Wanda, Imogene told her. I wrote it down on this piece of paper. See? It must have been an awful amount because even Wanda looked horrified. So Imogene got her charm bracelet, and she got Lucille Golden's imitation alligator pocketbook with Souvenir of Florida written on it. For a while she got 10 cents a week from Floyd Brush, till Floyd caught double pneumonia and lost 15 pounds and didn't care anymore. My friend Alice Wendelkin was so nasty clean that she had detergent hands by the time she was 4 years old. Just the same, Alice picked up a case of head lice when she was at summer camp, and somehow Imogene found out about that. She would sneak up on Alice at recess and holler, "Cooties!" and smack Alice's head. She nearly knocked Alice cross-eyed before one of the teachers saw her and took both of them into the principal. Now what's this all about? The principal wanted to know, but Alice wouldn't say. I had to hit her, Imogene told him. She's got cooties, and I saw one crawling in her hair, and I don't want them on me. You did not see one, Alice said. I don't have them anymore. What do you mean you don't have them anymore? The principal said. Did you have them lately? It really shook him up. He didn't want a whole school full of kids with cooties. So he sent Alice to the health room, and the nurse went all through her head with a fine-tooth comb and a magnifying glass, and finally said it was all right. But it was too late. Everybody called Alice Cooties the whole rest of the year. If Imogene didn't know a secret about a person, she would make one up. She would catch you in the girls' room or out in the hall and whisper, "I know what you did." And then you'd go crazy trying to figure out what it was you did that Imogene knew about. It was no good trying to get secrets on the Herdmans. Everybody already knew about every awful thing they did. You couldn't even tease them about their parents or holler, "Your father's in jail," because they didn't care. Actually, they didn't know what their father was or where he was or anything about him, because when Gladys was 2 years old, he climbed on a railroad train and disappeared. Nobody blamed him. Now and then you'd see Mrs. Herdman walking the cat on a length of chain around the block. But she worked double shifts at the shoe factory and wasn't home much. My mother's friend, Miss Phillips, was a social service worker, and she tried to get some welfare money for the Herdmans so Mrs. Herdman could just work one shift and spend more time with her children. But Mrs. Herdman wouldn't do it. She liked the work, she said. "It's not the work," Miss Phillips told my mother, "and it's not the money. It's just that she'd rather be at the shoe factory than shut up at home with that crowd of kids." She sighed. I can't say I blame her. So the Herdmans pretty much looked after themselves. Ralph looked after Imogene, and Imogene looked after Leroy, and Leroy looked after Claude, and so on down the line. The Herdmans were like most big families. The big ones taught the little ones everything they knew. And the proof of that was that the meanest Herdman of all was Gladys, the youngest. We figured they were headed straight for hell by way of the state penitentiary, until they got themselves mixed up in the church and my mother and our Christmas pageant. Mother didn't expect to have anything to do with the Christmas pageant except to make me and my little brother Charlie be in it. We didn't want to. And to make my father go and see it. He didn't want to. Every year he'd say the same thing. "I've seen the Christmas pageant." "You haven't seen this year's Christmas pageant," Mother would tell him. "Charlie is a shepherd this year." "Charlie was a shepherd last year." "No, you go on and go. I'm just going to put on my bathrobe and sit by the fire and relax." There's never anything different about the Christmas pageant. "There's something different this year," Mother said. "What?" "Charlie is wearing your bathrobe." So that year my father went to see his bathrobe, he said. Actually, he went every year, but it was always a struggle, and Mother said that was her contribution to the Christmas pageant, getting my father to go to it. But then she got stuck with the whole thing when Mrs. George Armstrong fell and broke her leg. We knew about this as soon as it happened, because Mrs. Armstrong only lived a block and a half away. We heard the siren and saw the ambulance and watched the policeman carry her out of the house on a stretcher. "Call Mr. Armstrong at work," she yelled at the policeman. "Shut off the stove under my potatoes. Inform the Ladies' Aid that I won't be at the meeting." One of the neighbor women called out, "Helen, are you in much pain?" And Mrs. Armstrong yelled back, "Yes, terrible. Don't let those children tear up my private hedge." Even in pain, Mrs. Armstrong could still give orders. She was so good at giving orders that she was just naturally the head of anything she belonged to, and at church she did everything but preach. Most of all, she ran the Christmas pageant every year. And here she was, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, flat on her back. "I don't know what they'll do now about the pageant," Mother said. But the pageant wasn't the only problem. Mrs. Armstrong was also chairman of the Ladies' Aid Bazaar and coordinator of the Women's Society potluck supper, and there was a lot of telephoning back and forth to see who would take over those jobs. Mother had a list of names, and while she was calling people about the Ladies' Aid Bazaar, Mrs. Homer McCarthy was trying to call Mother about the potluck supper. But Mrs. McCarthy got somebody else to do that, and Mother got somebody else to do the bazaar. So the only thing left was the Christmas pageant. And Mother got stuck with that. I could run the potluck supper with one hand tied behind my back, Mother told us. All you have to do is make sure everybody doesn't bring meatloaf. But the Christmas pageant... Our Christmas pageant isn't what you'd call four-star entertainment. Mrs. Armstrong breaking her leg was the only unexpected thing that ever happened to it. The script is standard: the inn, the stable, the shepherds, the star, and so are the costumes, and so is the casting. Primary kids are angels, intermediate kids are shepherds, big boys are wise men. Elmer Hopkins, the minister's son, has been Joseph for as long as I can remember. And my friend Alice Wendelkin is Mary because she's so smart, so neat and clean, and most of all, so holy looking. All the rest of us are the angel choir, lined up according to height because nobody can sing parts. As a matter of fact, nobody can even sing. We're strictly a no-talent outfit, except for a girl named Alberta Bottles who whistles. Last year, Alberta whistled "What Child Is This?" for a change of pace, but nobody liked it, especially Mrs. Bottles, because Alberta put too much into it and ran out of air and passed out cold on the manger in the middle of the third verse. Aside from that, though, it's always just the same Christmas story, year after year, with people shuffling around in bathrobes and bed sheets and sharp wings. Well, my father said once Mother got put in charge of it, here's your big chance. Why don't you cancel the pageant and show movies? Movies of what? Mother said. I don't know. Fred Stamper has 5 big reels of Yellowstone National Park. What does Yellowstone National Park have to do with Christmas? Mother asked. I know a good movie, Charlie said. We had it at school. It shows a heart operation and 2 kids got sick. Never mind, Mother said. I guess you all think you're pretty funny, but the Christmas pageant is a tradition, and I don't plan to do anything different. Of course, nobody even thought about the Herdmans in connection with the Christmas pageant. Most of us spent all week in school being pounded and poked and pushed around by the Herdmans, and we looked forward to Sunday as a real day of rest. Once a month, the whole Sunday school would go to church for the first 15 minutes of the service and do something special, sing a song, or act out a parable, or recite Bible verses. Usually, the little kids sang "Jesus Loves Me," which was all they were up to. But when my brother Charlie was in with the little kids, his teacher thought up something different to do. She had everybody write down on a piece of paper what they liked best about Sunday school, or draw a picture of what they liked best. And when we all got into the church, she stood up in front of the congregation and said, "Today, some of our youngest boys and girls are going to tell you what Sunday school means to them. Betsy, what do you have on your paper?" Betsy Cathcart stood up and said, "What I like best about Sunday school is the good feeling I get when I go there." I don't think she wrote that down at all, but it sounded terrific, of course. One kid said he liked hearing all the Bible stories. Another kid said, "I like learning songs about Jesus." 8 or 9 little kids stood up and said what they liked, and it was always something good about Jesus or God or cheerful friends or the nice teacher. Finally, the teacher said, "I think we have time for one more. Charlie, what can you tell us about Sunday school?" My little brother Charlie stood up, and he didn't even have to look at his piece of paper. "What I like best about Sunday school," he said, "is that there aren't any Herdmans here." Well, the teacher should have stuck with "Jesus Loves Me," because everybody forgot all the nice churchy things the other kids said and just remembered what Charlie said about the Herdmans. When we went to pick him up after church, his teacher told us, "I'm sure there are many things that Charlie likes about Sunday school. Maybe he will tell you what some of them are." She smiled at all of us, but you could tell she was really mad. On the way home, I asked Charlie, "What are some of the other things that you like that she was talking about?" He shrugged. "I like all the other stuff, but she said to write down what we like best, and what I like best is no Herdmans." Not a very Christian sentiment, my father said. Maybe not, but it's a very practical one, Mother told him. Last year, Charlie had spent the whole second grade being black and blue because he had to sit next to Leroy Herdman. In the end, it was Charlie's fault that the Herdmans showed up in church. For 3 days in a row, Leroy Herdman stole the dessert from Charlie's lunchbox, and finally Charlie just gave up trying to do anything about it. "Oh, go on and take it," he said. "I don't care. I get all the dessert I want in Sunday school." Leroy wanted to know more about that. "What kind of dessert?" he said. "Chocolate cake," Charlie told him, "and candy bars, and cookies, and Kool-Aid. We get refreshments all the time, all we want." "You're a liar," Leroy said. Leroy was right. We got jelly beans at Easter and punch and cookies on Children's Day, and that was it. "We get ice cream too," Charlie went on, "and donuts and popcorn balls." "Who gives it to you?" Leroy wanted to know. "The minister," Charlie said. He didn't know who else to say. Of course, that was the wrong thing to tell the Herdmans if you wanted them to stay away. And sure enough, the very next Sunday, there they were, slouching into Sunday school, eyes peeled for the refreshments. "Where did you get the cake?" Ralph asked the Sunday school superintendent, and Mr. Grady said, "Well, son, I don't know about any cake, but they're collecting the food packages out in the kitchen." What he meant was the canned stuff we brought in every year as a Thanksgiving present for the orphans' home. It was just our bad luck that the Herdmans picked that Sunday to come, because when they saw all the cans of spaghetti and beans and grape drink and peanut butter, they figured there might be some truth to what Charlie said about refreshments. So they stayed. They didn't sing any hymns or say any prayers, but they did make a little money, because I saw Imogene snake a handful of coins out of the collection basket when it went past her. At the end of the morning, Mr. Grady came to every class and made an announcement. "We'll be starting rehearsals soon for our Christmas pageant," he said. "And next week after the service, we'll all gather in the back of the church to decide who will play the main roles. But of course we want every boy and every girl in our Sunday school to take part in the pageant, so be sure your parents know that you'll be staying a little later next Sunday." Mr. Grady made this same speech every year, so he didn't get any wild applause. Besides, as I said, we all knew what part we were going to play anyway. Alice Wendelkin must have been a little bit worried, though, because she turned around to me with this sticky smile on her face and said, "I hope you're going to be in the angel choir again. You're so good in the angel choir." What she meant was, "I hope you won't get to be married just because your mother's running the pageant." She didn't have to worry. I didn't want to be married. I didn't want to be in the angel choir either, but everybody had to be something. All of a sudden, Imogene Herdman dug me in the ribs with her elbow. She had the sharpest elbows of anybody I ever knew. "What's the pageant?" she said. "It's a play," I said, and for the first time that day, except when she saw the collection basket, Imogene looked interested. All the Herdmans are big moviegoers, though they never pay their own way. One or two of them start a fight at the box office of the theater while the others slip in. They get their popcorn the same way, and then they spread out all over the place so the manager can never find them all before the picture's over. "What's the play about?" Imogene asked. "It's about Jesus," I said. "Everything here is," she muttered, so I figured Imogene didn't care much about the Christmas pageant. But I was wrong. Mrs. Armstrong, who was still trying to run things from her hospital bed, said that the same people always got the main parts. "But it's important to give everybody a chance," she told Mother over the telephone. "Let me tell you what I do." Mother sighed and turned off the heat under the pork chops. "All right, Helen," she said. Mrs. Armstrong called Mother at least every other day, and she always called at supper time. "Don't let me interrupt your supper," she always said, and then went right ahead and did it anyway, while my father paced up and down the hall saying things under his breath about Mrs. Armstrong. "Here's what I do," Mrs. Armstrong said. "I get them all together and tell them about the rehearsals and that they must be on time and pay close attention. Then I tell them that the main parts are Mary and Joseph and the wise men and the angel of the Lord. And then I always remind them that there are no small parts, only small actors. Do they understand what that means? Mother asked. Oh, yes, Mrs. Armstrong said. Later, Mother asked me if I knew what that meant about small parts and small actors. I didn't really know. None of us did. It was just something Mrs. Armstrong always said. I guess it means that the short kids have to be in the front row of the angel choir or nobody else can see them. I thought so, Mother said. It doesn't mean that at all. It really means that every single person in the pageant is just as important as every other person, that the littlest baby angel is just as important as Mary. Go and tell that to Alice Wendelkin, I said, and Mother told me not to be so fresh. She didn't get very mad, though, because she knew I was right. You could have a Christmas pageant without any baby angels, but you couldn't have one without a Mary. Mrs. Armstrong knew it too. I always start with Mary, she told Mother over the telephone. I tell them that we must choose our Mary carefully because Mary was the mother of Jesus. I know that, Mother said, wanting to get off the telephone and cook the pork chops. Yes, I tell them that our Mary should be a cheerful, happy little girl who is unselfish and kind to others. Then I tell them about Joseph, that he was God's choice to be Jesus' father, and our Joseph ought to be a little boy. She went on and got as far as the second wise man when Mother said, Helen, I'll have to go now. There's somebody at the door. Actually, there was somebody at the door. It was my father, standing out on the porch in his coat and hat, leaning on the doorbell. When Mother let him in, he took off his hat and bowed to her. Lady, can you give me some supper? I haven't had a square meal in 3 days. Oh, for goodness sake, Mother said. Come on in. What will the neighbors think to see you standing out there ringing your own doorbell? And why didn't you ring the doorbell 10 minutes ago anyway? Mrs. Armstrong called Mother 2 more times that week to tell her that people could hem up costumes but couldn't cut them, and to tell her not to let the angel choir wear lipstick. And by Sunday, Mother was already sick of the whole thing. After church, we all filed into the back 7 pews, along with 2 or 3 Sunday school teachers who were supposed to keep everybody quiet. It was a terrible time to try to keep everybody quiet. All the little kids were tired, and all the big kids were hungry, and all the mothers wanted to go home and cook dinner, and all the fathers wanted to go home and watch the football game on TV. Now, this isn't going to take very long, Mother told us. My father had said it better not take very long because he wanted to watch the football game too. He also wanted to eat, he said. He hadn't had a decent meal all week. First, I'm going to tell you about the rehearsals, Mother said. We'll have our rehearsals on Wednesdays at 6:30. We're only going to have 5 rehearsals, so you must all try to be present at every one. What if we get sick? Asked a little kid in the front pew. You won't get sick, Mother told him, which was exactly what she told Charlie that morning when Charlie said he didn't want to be a shepherd and would be sick to his stomach if she made him to be one. Now, you little children in the cradle room and the primary class will be our angels, Mother said. You'll like that, won't you? They all said yes. What else could they say? The older boys and girls will be shepherds and guests at the inn and members of the choir. Mother was really zipping along, and I thought how mad Mrs. Armstrong would be about all the things she was leaving out. And we need Mary and Joseph, the 3 wise men, and the angel of the Lord. They aren't hard parts, but they're very important parts, so those people must absolutely come to every rehearsal. What if they get sick? It was the same little kid, and it made you wonder what kind of little kid he was to be so interested in sickness. They won't get sick either, Mother said, looking a little cross. Now, we all know what kind of person Mary was. She was quiet and gentle and kind, and the little girl who plays Mary should try to be that kind of person. I know that many of you would like to be Mary in our pageant, but of course, we can only have one Mary. So I'll ask for volunteers, and then we'll all decide together which girl should get the part. That was pretty safe to say, since the only person who ever raised her hand was Alice Wendelkin. But Alice just sat there, chewing on a piece of her hair and looking down at the floor. And the only person who raised her hand this time was Imogene Herdman. "Did you have a question, Imogene?" Mother asked. I guess that was the only reason she could think of for Imogene to have her hand up. "No," Imogene said. "I want to be Mary." She looked back over her shoulder. "And Ralph wants to be Joseph." "Yeah," Ralph said. Mother just stared at them. It was like a detective movie when the nice little old gray-haired lady sticks a gun in the back window and says, "Give me all your money," and you just can't believe it. Mother couldn't believe this. "Well," she said after a minute, "we want to be sure that everyone has a chance. Does anyone else want to volunteer for Joseph?" No one did. No one ever did, especially not Elmer Hopkins. But he couldn't do anything about it because he was the minister's son. One year he didn't volunteer to be Joseph, and neither did anyone else, and afterward I heard Reverend Hopkins talking to Elmer out in the hall. "You're going to be Joseph," Reverend Hopkins said. "That's it." "I don't want to be Joseph," Elmer told him. "I'm too big and I feel dumb up there, and all those little kids give me a pain in the neck." "I can understand that," Reverend Hopkins said. "I can even sympathize. But till somebody else volunteers for Joseph, you're stuck with it." "Nobody's ever going to do that," Elmer said. "I can't even offer Grady Baker 50 cents to be Joseph. I'm going to have to be Joseph for the rest of my life." "Cheer up," Reverend Hopkins told him. "Maybe somebody will turn up." I'll bet he didn't think that somebody would be Ralph Herdman. "All right," Mother said. "Ralph will be our Joseph. Now, does anyone else want to volunteer for Mary?" Mother looked all around, trying to catch somebody's eye. Anybody's eye. "Janet? Roberta? Alice, don't you want to volunteer this year?" "No," Alice said so low you could hardly hear her. "I don't want to." Nobody volunteered to be wise men either, except Leroy, Claude, and Ollie Herdman. So there was my mother, stuck with a Christmas pageant full of Herdmans in the main roles. There was only one Herdman left over, and one main role left over, and you didn't have to be very smart to figure out that Gladys was going to be the angel of the Lord. "What do I have to do?" Gladys wanted to know. "The angel of the Lord was the one who brought the good news to the shepherds," Mother said. Right away, all the shepherds began to wiggle around in their seats, figuring that any good news Gladys brought them would come with a smack in the teeth. Charlie's friend, Hobby Carmichael, raised his hand and said, "I can't be a shepherd. We're going to Philadelphia." "Why didn't you say so before?" Mother asked. "I forgot." Another kid said, "My mother doesn't want me to be a shepherd." "Why not?" Mother said. "I don't know. She just said, 'Don't be a shepherd.'" One kid was honest. "Gladys Herdman hits too hard," he said. "Why, Gladys isn't going to hit anybody," Mother said. "What an idea. The angel just visits the shepherds in the fields and tells them Jesus is born. And hits them," said the kid. Of course he was right. You could just picture Gladys whamming shepherds left and right, but Mother said that was perfectly ridiculous. "I don't want to hear another word about it," she said. "No shepherds may quit, or get sick," she added, before the kid in the front pew could ask. While everybody was leaving, Mother grabbed Alice Wendelkin by the arm and said, "Alice, why in the world didn't you raise your hand to be Mary?" "I don't know," Alice said, looking mad. But I knew. I'd heard Imogene Herdman telling Alice what would happen to her if she dared to volunteer. All the ordinary, everyday Herdman things like clonking you on the head and drawing pictures all over your homework papers and putting worms in your coat pocket. "I don't care," Alice told her. "I don't care what you do. I'm always Mary in the pageant." "And next spring," Imogene went on, squinching up her eyes, "when the pussy willows come out, I'll stick a pussy willow so far down in your ear that nobody can reach it, and it'll sprout there, and it'll grow and grow, and you'll spend the rest of your life with a pussy willow bush growing out of your ear. You had to admire her. That was the worst thing any of them ever thought up to do. Of course, some people might not think that could happen, but it could. Ollie Herdman did it once. He got this terrible earache in school, and when the nurse looked down his ear with her little lighted tube, she yelled so loud you could hear her all the way down the hall. "He's got something growing down there," she hollered. They had to take Ollie to the hospital and put him under and dig this sprouted pussy willow out of his ear. So that was why Alice kept her mouth shut about being Mary. "You know she wouldn't do all those things," she said. I told Alice as we walked home. "Yes, she would," Alice said. "Herdmans will do anything. But your mother should have told them no. Somebody should put Imogene out of that pageant and all the rest of them too. They'll do something terrible and ruin the whole thing." I thought she was probably right, and so did lots of other people. And for 2 or 3 days, all anybody could talk about was the Herdmans being Mary and Joseph and all. Mrs. Homer McCarthy called Mother to say that she had been thinking about it, and if the Herdmans wanted to participate in our Christmas celebration, why didn't we let them hand out programs at the door? "We don't have programs for the Christmas pageant," Mother said. "Well, maybe we ought to get some printed and put the Herdmans in charge of that." Alice's mother told the Ladies' Aid that it was sacrilegious to let Imogene Herdman be Mary. Somebody we never heard of called up Mother on the telephone and said her name was Hazelbeck, and she lived on Sproul Hill, and was it true that Imogene Herdman was going to be Mary, the mother of Jesus, in a church play? "Yes," Mother said. "Imogene is going to be Mary in our Christmas pageant." "And the rest of them too?" the lady asked. "Yes. Ralph is going to be Joseph, and the others are the wise men and the angel of the Lord." "You must be crazy," this Mrs. Hazelbeck told Mother. "I live next door to that outfit with their yelling and screaming and their insane cat and their garage door going up and down all day long, and let me tell you, you're in for a rowdy time." Some people said it wasn't fair for a whole family who didn't even go to our church to barge in and take over the pageant. My father said somebody better lock up the Women's Society silver service. And Mother just said she would rather be in the hospital with Mrs. Armstrong. But then the flower committee took a potted geranium to Mrs. Armstrong and told her what was going on, and she nearly fell out of bed, tractions bar and all. "I feel personally responsible," she said. "Whatever happens, I accept the blame. If I'd been up and around and doing my duty, this never would have happened." And that made my mother so mad she couldn't see straight. "If she'd been up and around, it wouldn't have happened," Mother said. "That woman. She must be surprised that the sun is still coming up every morning without her to supervise the sunrise. Well, let me tell you." "Don't tell me," my father said. "I'm on your side." "I just mean that Helen Armstrong is not the only woman alive who can run a Christmas pageant. Up till now, I'd made up my mind just to do the best I could under the circumstances. But now," she stabbed a meat fork into the pot roast, "I'm going to make this the very best Christmas pageant anybody ever saw, and I'm going to do it with Herdmans too. After all, they raised their hands and nobody else did, and that's that." And it was too. For one thing, nobody else wanted to take over the pageant with or without Herdmans. And for another thing, Reverend Hopkins got fed up with all the complaints and told everybody where to get off. Of course, he didn't say, "Go jump in the lake, Mrs. Wendelkin," or anything like that. He just reminded everyone that when Jesus said, "Suffer the little children to come unto me," Jesus meant all the little children, including Herdmans. So that shut everybody up, even Alice's mother. And the next Wednesday, we started rehearsals.